Good evening, dear students. Welcome to our second lecture of evidence-based intervention in head-on-device. After the first lecture, we have got some basic understanding of what is evidence-based research and what do we mean intervention in head-on-device. And in today's lecture, I will guide you throughout the 4 parts of the content. First, we will take a quick review of what we have learned in the first lecture. And regarding the individual essay, I received some students' emails. They're a bit confused about what can be written for the individual essay and how it can be organized and assessed. So I will give you some examples. And after that, we will discuss a new concept, evidence-based practice. Because today the main theme is what is the gap between evidence-based research and the practice of education practice. By the end of the lecture, the same as last week, I will present you an example so you will get more impressed about how evidence-based research can be applied in educational practice and how the findings can contribute to our daily education practice. So let's first talk about the individual essay, because some students are a bit worried about that. The individual essay accounts for 3/4 of the final grade. And according to the requirements, you need to select an on-device intervention, so a kind of education intervention which hasn't been empirically tested. So at this moment, there is still no evidence to support this intervention. So no one knows whether this intervention is effective or not. And you need to analyze it and go to some literature, relevant journal publications or research findings of the previous research, and you formulate your research questions and hypotheses. Because in this course, we don't have the requirement for you to collect the data, so you only need to design a research plan. So in order to test whether this education intervention is effective or not, what kind of evidence-based research design you can make. And then you write all this information into your reports around 4 A4 page, including the reference list. And don't forget, we use the APA reference style. And the assessment rubric is quite detailed, and you can find it from below. The submission deadline is March the 26th. Now I'm going to present you some examples of previous students' individual essay. So the first one is a new effective management system of children with ADHD in the primary and secondary education. And the second one is about a healthy school and the stimulants for the secondary vocational education. So these are 2 examples that previous students have adopted. So these are 2 types of education intervention, which haven't been empirically tested yet. And if we want to write an essay about it, we start with a brief description of this program, about what this intervention, about this education program is about, in which education sector, basisschool or middelbare school or beroepsonderwijs, etc. And then we talk about using such kind of education intervention that the designer is going to solve what kind of practical problem. So what kind of educational problem is aimed to be solved using such kind of intervention. And you also select some theories to support why they design such kind of intervention. It's because they believe this should be effective. And then, based on the theory, you formulate your research question and hypothesis. Like in this intervention, they are aiming at test the academic achievement of the students, or test the motivation level of the students, or their behavior change, etc. And then you design your research. So who will be your target population, and how are you going to approach to this population and select the sample? What kind of sampling technique are you going to use? And very important is, how are you going to measure it? So what is your instrument? Are you going to use questionnaire survey, or are you going to use standardized tests like the school tools? Yeah. Or are you going to use kind of behavior measurement scale? And in order to implement this research design, what kind of requirements are you going to set up? Such as, in order to get valid data, that intervention needs to be last around 1 semester or 1 year, yeah, or even 2 years. So then we can see the effects of the intervention. Because we are not going to collect the real data, so data analysis part will be skipped. But we can still reflect on what could be the limitation of such kind of design, and what could be the research significance, so contribution of your findings. And don't forget, by the end of the essay, you need to attach a literature list. So this is the organization of your individual essay. I hope after this description, you get a better picture how the individual essay can be organized. If you still have some questions, please do not hesitate to email me. Now I'm going to take a quick review of what we have learned in the last lecture. First, we discussed what is evidence-based. So what do we refer to evidence? And what is intervention, or let's say the treatment? An evidence-based intervention originated from the medicine research, because when a medicine is going to be promoted in the market, they need to be first tested in the lab that this medicine is effective, or this medicine has minimal or very little side effects. And we distinguish the zachte bewijs and hard bewijs, so the soft evidence and the hard evidence. For the soft evidence, we need to keep it in mind. Our pilot test, survey research, correlational research, case study, or some interviews to collect experience from education professionals. These are all deemed as zachte bewijs. So they are not very strong to support our intervention. But in order to strengthen it, we can use some review study, meta-analysis, to focus on the past best evidence. With those kind of review analysis, we can strengthen our zachte bewijs. And the effect size is a kind of measurement we frequently used, a standardized measurement, effect size. Regarding the hard evidence, we talk about the research design, which is based on randomization. And we have a comparison between groups. One is the control group, the other one is the experimental group. And in order to make the data more richer, let's say much richer, we also collect some using some other research methods to collect the practical knowledge from education professionals. And let's say the gold standard of this kind of research design is called randomized controlled trials. So we tend to think this is the best research design to find out whether the intervention is effective or not. So the randomized controlled trials, the RCT, starts from a randomization of your samples. So each individual of the samples has the equal chance to be selected into the control group or the experimental group. And then they receive the same amount of treatment, but the control group received the traditional treatment while the experimental group received the intervention, the new treatment. And after a certain period, we test their outcomes. We compare that to see whether the outcome of the experimental group is better than the outcome of the control group. However, in reality, such kind of research design is most of the time not feasible. As I have mentioned, if you do this research in a school, the classes are already existing. So as the teacher, you have no chance to assign the pupils into this instructional method or into the traditional instructional method. So what you can do is use the quasi-experimental design. So you skip the first stage, randomization. So no randomization at the beginning, but use the classes directly. But in order to guarantee that all the participants start from the same level, you can add a pretest into it. Using the pretest, you try to find out whether this experimental group and the control group, is there any significant difference between them? If there is no significant difference, you can assume they are starting from the same level, and then you give the experimental group the intervention, you give the control group the traditional intervention or even no intervention. And after that, you use a post-test to see the outcomes. So we call this as a quasi-experimental design. Last week, at the end of the lecture, I have also presented an example, American project Success for All. And in the Netherlands, this has also been adopted for some schools. Yeah, and we have also introduced from where you can get more information about it. So this is what we have discussed last week. Get a very basic understanding about what is evidence-based education. And today we are going to talk more about what is the gap between research and practice. So it's a very challenging task. Okay, now you can go on to watch the second video of the lecture.